I mean, marathoning, it's not an easy thing on its own. It's a very long thing of endurance. And especially marathon distances, you get to a point where the end where it really sucks. And I think that it's very well translates into writing a novel. You have a lot of the training that makes out the first draft. And when it really sucks, when you are near the end and you're doing your final edits, it is some of the most painful things that you can go through. But right when you push in the end, you'll have that gratification, that sense of accomplishment.
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. So welcome back once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I'm excited to have Kaden Love here with me today. Kaden, I have been seeing you all over social media. I don't think I've ever seen a debut author get as much attention as you have. So I'm really excited that you were able to join me here today.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. So just excited.
Yeah, cool. So why don't you just get us started? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing journey. What got you started as a writer?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm Kaden Love. I just barely published my first novel, Elegy, a Fragmented Vineyard. That came out about a week and a half ago. And this is my first novel that I've written. I grew up reading fantasy, as do most authors. But I really didn't get into writing until I was about 21 or so. So I started just kind of jotting down ideas, but this book itself took me about 2 years for the whole process.
Okay.
It was about 9 months for first draft, and then as it is a big learning curve, I had lots of editing to do. So it
Yeah.
was lots of that. And really what got me into writing was a my younger brother got into D&D at the time, and I just
Okay.
kind of liked the idea of toying with my own stories.
Right.
And I was reading some of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson at the time, watched his lectures, and then just started.
Cool. Yeah, those lectures are a great resource for anyone if they, if you're thinking of writing or are right, even if you've been writing for years. I think I definitely watched those too, especially as I was starting out with my, writing journey as well. That I mean, he takes a lot of concepts, especially if you're a fantasy writer. Breaks them down and
Hmm.
yeah, does a great job. Yeah, very cool. So, what made you decide to get the novel going? You talked about your D&D. Like, what was there a certain impetus, like a certain one single event that made you decide to put together this novel, or was it kind of a series of things?
I think it was a series of things. The ones that really did trigger me into starting and writing a novel was the D&D, the those Brand Sanderson lectures, and then just I I I run a lot, and while I do that, I listen to audiobooks, and I'd have phases in my life where I'd go and read more, read less, and I was at a higher peak of reading, and I just kind of felt the impression that it was something that I should do, and so I started with some initial ideas, and just started writing away, and the first few chapters have changed a bit, but those are the ideas that I started with.
Yeah, right on. And so, what's the motivation behind your storytelling? Obviously, you had this story in you. Is there something driving you to put the stories down?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every person has something to say, some lessons that they've learned in life. And some authors that I know that have really done that for me are like C.S. Lewis. I really admire his work, and especially the Narnia series, very allegorical teaching in that. And as well as Neil Gaiman. When I was
Okay.
watching Brandon Sanderson's lectures, I did the Neil Gaiman masterclass. And I mean, from a lot of his stories, you can kind of pull that there is something he's trying to talk about. But, he talks about how every story should have a purpose. And these are a way to convey what we think is important in life in a an interesting medium. Some people express that through music or through art, but what speaks to me is through literature. And I really wanted to do that while just, of course, having fun with it. I think that
Hmm.
there's always a meaning and reason behind someone's work, but a lot of it is because we love to read. We love fantasy and sci-fi and the worlds that they are, and being able to talk about things that are meaningful to us through that makes it so much better.
Yeah, right. Cool. And so you talked about C.S. Lewis and Brandon Sanderson. Do you have any other authors that have influenced your work?
There have been plenty. As of late, a lot of the independent authors that I've read, like Zach Argyle, is I think the one that really kicked me off into starting independently, and
Okay.
just seeing someone kind of go from that point of being able to do the whole thing on their own. A lot of other authors, of course, George R. R. Martin. I love the political system that he put into A Song of Ice and Fire. It's
Right.
that is a lot of what my book is. It's more so, of course, I have battles, you need things like that, but it is much more of a political game. And I thought that that was so cool just to see you have these characters like on the outside. A lot of people see fantasy, they just think dragons and swords, but a lot of it is, the people behind the kings and the people high up in politics working their way to manipulate the politics of the land.
Had you considered traditional publishing at all, or did you know right away that you were going to self-publish?
Yeah, so I initially planned on traditional because I think, most people that start writing, that is seemingly the only option, just having the idea, oh, I'm getting a book published. Most people think, oh, wow, like when can I buy it at Barnes and Noble, which, you can do with independent books.
Yeah.
But I had the chance to talk to a couple indie authors, which I thought was so cool. Like I read like Gunmetal Gods by Zelma Akhtar
Mm.
and was able to just talk to him really easily, and he gave me some
Yeah.
feedback on my early writing,
Nice.
and just to like have a very blunt conversation with people, like which way do you go? And of course they're self-published authors, so they're probably a little more biased towards that, but I was able to see kind of the things that come with self-published, and I really did like the story of just getting my work out there. um, I know that I mean, I didn't even try to query. Maybe with some future side novel, I might consider it, but
Hmm.
it's never something that like I'm putting a lot of hope into. I write the books that I want and I put them out there, and if they are successful, that's up for the readers to decide more of than just an agent or a company.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point, I mean, like the self-published community is, I mean, really open and willing to share and give advice. And I mean, at least I've found that as well. Just, I mean, to be able to reach out to someone to talk to and ask questions, I think is pretty easy to do. Yeah, I had Zamil on the show last year as well. Great guy, and yeah, we
Hmm.
had a great chat there as well. So yeah, I'm glad that you were able to reach out and chat with him.
Yeah. And it's just I don't know, these people, especially now as an author, when I have some people ask for like what I've done and help to get to the point where I am, even though I'm just in the beginning, I'm so willing to help because I've kind of started to see it from the other side. These early authors starting off, where it'll be a couple of years until they publish, having an actual author give them advice, or because it's not an easy process, but any help along
Right.
the way makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and and there's so much out there that to know, and not one person isn't going to know everything. So I think no matter how far along on the journey you are, there's something that you've probably come across or worked out that somebody else maybe hasn't, at least not in the way you have. So I find that too. Like whether someone has one book or 50, there's always something that you can learn and chat about, right? So that's part of
Hmm.
the reason why I do this, because I enjoy talking to someone like you who has just put their first book out. I think that's really cool, and but I also enjoy talking to someone who has 30 or 40 books out, um, because there's always something to learn, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Um, so what does your writing process look like? You put the book together. You said, over the course of the last year or so. Do you write every day? What is like? Are you a pantser or a plotter? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a nice in between. So my book is the first in a trilogy, and I'm maybe like a third of the way through book two, and I
Okay.
know pretty much everything's going to happen there. I know how the series needs to end, and I usually have the next 2 to 7. I know that's a kind of a big range, 2 to 7 chapters lined out what needs to happen, and I have a vague idea of how each character needs to progress in a single book,
Okay.
but a lot of it is just on the moment. I'm not someone that'll sit down, write a huge document of the whole novel,
Hmm.
because I like a lot of the surprise. Sometimes I'll be writing and I'll have a new idea that could throw that completely out of the way. Um,
Totally.
and so that's just kind of what I go with. And I don't really have much of a writer's block, because sometimes if I'm stuck on a chapter, I like working with multiple perspectives, so I'll jump right to the next character and go back.
Okay.
Um, or just start on, a random side project just to let my mind go. Yeah, I do love to write every day. I try to, and even if it's like a really busy day and I only have the chance to write down a couple hundred words on my phone while I'm going to and from work, I'll do that.
Hmm.
But
Right.
ideally, I like to get
Nice.
about 1,000 words in. Unless I'm editing, then that's just out the window. Just try to get
Right.
down.
Yeah, that's a great strategy, and yeah, I love hearing how each author is different in how they plot their novels, or completely pants their novels, or however they do it. I know I was talking to Christopher Rocchio the other day, and he like writes a 60 page outline. I'm like, dude,
So
that's a
crazy.
skinny draft. That's almost not an outline anymore.
Yeah.
but but I mean, it works. Obviously, it works for him. So
Hmm.
um, it's just great. So let's talk a little bit about Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard. I guess
Hmm.
first, tell us a bit about it and what it's all about.
Yeah. So I tell people that it is a political epic fantasy that has a little bit of a dystopian taste, and the magic system is based on organ transplants. So the premise of my book is that you start at the present. 10 years before that, some children started to be born with a third organ next to the small and large intestine, which gives them this hyperdigestion where the food that they digest goes into a certain power. And kind of like how Mistborn is, there's different classes of abilities. Maybe one is shape-shifting, one's mind reading. Get a little more
Okay.
complex than that, but that's the essence of it.
Yeah. Right.
5 years later after that, which is 5 years ago in the novel's present time, these people that figured out that they could take this organ from newborns and transplant it to an adult. This would then, give the adults the ability to use that for the function in society rather than waiting for these children to grow up. And there's, that people use this for surgeons, or, the mind readers for lawmen, that they can, help solve crime immediately, things like that. And the only thing is that it will kill the child. And so here's the big moral dilemma: is, do we allow these kids to grow up, or do we utilize this in adults who will be able to help society flourish? And it's split between four, I guess you could say, city states, and two that are, so two are against it, the other four are for it. And it centers on three characters. Um, One is completely for it, one is completely against it, and then we have a third that's kind of very passive in the middle, trying to figure out what's right. And that's the basis of it.
Yeah. Really cool. That is such a unique premise. I love
Hmm.
that. So, and it is being a unique premise and a unique magic system. I haven't come across anything like that though. What was the inspiration behind it, and how did you kind of come up with the idea for the story?
So, like I was saying, that I don't talk about it as much in the book, but it is that hyper digestion. That's the initial idea that I had, that I
Okay.
was thinking of a magic system where people could harness the power of life from the food that they ate. So, the animals that were once living, the plants that were once living, they have some organ in their body that extracts that and gives them an ability. And so, those nutrients go directly into a part. Like I said, there would be these big, super behemoth people that it goes directly into their muscles and their minds, making them so much smarter. Or maybe it goes to help manipulate and change the pigment of their skin to whatever they want. And so I toyed with that idea and put it to, okay, what if, only a small amount of people had it? And then what if people wanted to take this power for themselves? And it turned into that big problem with organ harvesting and grafting.
Right. Yeah. Just a spark of an idea that
Yeah.
turned into a story. Yeah. Awesome. I'll take a step back a little bit. We'll talk more about, the world and that sort of thing. But I want to talk a little bit more about your marketing approach. Like I said, kind of at the intro there, I don't think I've seen a debut author as widely shared as I've seen Elegy of the Vineyard,
Mhm.
just absolutely everywhere. Can you talk a bit about how that happened and what you've kind of done to set yourself up for success?
Yeah. So I attribute it mostly to being on Twitter, and I think just being a part of the indie community. Um, Too much of my fault, but also success. I initially planned to publish in October or November, and my editor and I decided that my book was not quite ready at that time, so we pushed it back to January. With this, I'd done a cover reveal in June, which is around the time I really started getting active on Twitter.
Okay.
And so I think for a while people knew I had a novel coming. My wife did the art. It was eye-catching for some people. And I mean, the title's really weird. So it just got some people's attention. And a lot of it was, okay, so here I've established myself. I was on a couple discords, but I don't think people really knew me much. And most of it came from like I said, what really kicked it off was I read Threadlight by Zach Argyle, loved it, and talked to him about it. And then I just started sharing my love for it on Twitter. And when people ask me, how do you network? It is, I read indie books or just other books too, of course, and just talk about how much I love them. Sometimes it isn't even a book I read, like Sons of Darkness was an awesome book. And when I first saw it, just that black and white cover marketed as an Indian Game of Thrones, I was in love with the idea. And so I started sharing it. And Gaurav Mohanty, the author, was just like really grateful for me doing that. And
Well,
I just tried to, promote it. And then when it came out, I was super excited. And, I did end up loving it. But the fact was that I just started by getting excited for a book and sharing that. And when people see that you're trying to be a positive force in the community, they're more willing to promote your work. They're willing to help out. And so a lot of that was building connections with, a
mm,
lot of people in FanFi Addict who helped me kind of do my early promotional stuff. And so when the Kickstarter finally came around, people knew that my novel was coming. I made it pretty simple, just had paperbacks and hardbacks, nothing super inexpensive like a lot of those really fancy editions.
right.
And I think Kickstarter is a great thing because, especially as an independent author, it gives people a reason to invest in you as a person. People
Hmm.
haven't read this book for the most part, and they are willing to invest in what you like. Like when you have the little Kickstarter video, a lot of people say, don't talk about what this book is, why they should do it. Just be excited, be yourself, and talk about why they should invest in you.
Okay. Yeah. And so, what made you decide to launch with the Kickstarter? 'Cause I know a lot of people will do a Kickstarter later on for a special edition. You did kind of the launch with the Kickstarter, and then your book came out kind of the week after it ended, or something like that.
Mhm.
What I guess drew you to launching with the Kickstarter, and how did you come about making that decision?
So I was on a couple of those discords, like India Chords, things like that, and I was just sitting there trying to figure out a good way for a good launch. And Michael Michelle, that wrote The Price of Power, had a really successful Kickstarter launch. So I was kind of curious, chatted with him a bit, and he thought it was a great idea. And it did work out for me really well. And so I talked with him as an independent author, just his debut. I talked to some other authors that were doing their special editions, and then there's there's a Facebook group that's just authors of Kickstarter. And so I started just looking at different things people did, and I like the idea of a big launch at the beginning. And my Amazon sales aren't really big right now, even though I've had a lot of purchases. Most of them were Kickstarter. A lot of people are
Okay.
like, Caden, how are the sales going? It's like they're going okay, but the people that wanted my novel on release got it through Kickstarter, and so a lot of that is just waiting for those physicals to arrive. And I personally love the idea of just small goodies like adding for stretch goals, or like add-ons, bookmarks, stickers. My wife, like I said, she's the artist, so I added
Yeah.
two full page illustrations in there just as things. And I also didn't have
Cool.
super high hopes. A lot of people will say, like start your first Kickstarter at 1,000 goal. I did 500 because I wanted early fulfillment if I was I wanted to reach that goal early if I was going to. And I hit 4,500, which is wonderful. It's not
Yeah.
as big as some other authors, but it was great. All I could ask for.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, like for a first novel, I think he did tremendous. I mean, I think that's a
Mhm.
really successful campaign. So I mean, congratulations on that. Tell me a little. Oh, I was going to ask you, was there anything different that you did to promote the Kickstarter that, other than connecting with the indie author community, was there anything specific that you did to promote your Kickstarter that you found worked out really well?
Just I had when my Kickstarter started showing up, I had a couple of other authors reach out to me on there, just through messages saying like, "Hey, do you want to promote yours? Do you want me to promote yours, and you can promote mine because you send out, the updates and stuff." And that was really great. So I think most of it was just working with other authors, um, and then just being like, I didn't ever get to the products, like the projects we love page, because I only ran mine for 14 days. Maybe I could have
Okay.
gotten it better if I would have run longer, but I was visible. You could look on the popular Kickstarters, and my book was there. So people
Mhm.
that were looking for fantasy books to back, there's a good chance they saw mine. So
Right.
I think a lot of that is just in the system itself, how it works.
Yeah.
And, so in the future, I think I do want to do it longer. I would like to do that for my second book, and just do, there's a sweet spot, not too long, not too short, maybe like just to do it a week or so more, just to see if it could get to the products we love or things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you plan to run a Kickstarter for each of the books in the series now?
Yeah, so I'd love to do it for the next one. And hopefully by then I'll have a little bit of a bigger following to do
Hmm.
some cool things. Like I've said, I'd love to do custom miniatures, or, like full page art prints that you can order signed, things like that. Um, just because I think that it's a reason to get excited. And, Kickstarters do take a little bit longer to be fulfilled, but when people get them, they're like, oh, finally, I've been waiting for this for so long.
Yeah.
And one of the things is with Kickstarters, it makes it really easy to share if you've backed it. Right after you back it, it says, like share that you've done it. So a lot of it is it markets for itself. So if someone is supporting me, they back it, they just click a button, they can share it on whatever social media they want.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Kickstarter has a lot of organic reach like that. I think that is one benefit that Kickstarter really builds into their platform well. Yeah, and I want to touch on one other thing that you mentioned, just reaching out to the author community. I think, as new authors, I think are often afraid to reach out to other authors, right? I know I definitely probably would not, or was not that brave when I started out to, and it's amazing how willing people are to connect with someone who's looking to get into the space, especially on Twitter. Like if Twitter's good, probably for nothing else, but for some reason it's the kind of the home that sci-fi and fantasy authors have found, and connect with
Mhm.
each other really well there. um, and I didn't realize that until 3 years into being an author, because Twitter is one of those
Yeah.
platforms that it's like, well, I mean, I've had an account forever, but it's not something I ever looked at. And then I'm not even sure what clued me into it, but all of a sudden I realized no, the like the like fantasy and sci-fi um, community there is still going strong, uh, and
Hmm.
they really it seems like they haven't really found a good alternative to it. I think is part of the problem. Like Blue Sky looked like it was going to edge in a little bit there, but
Yeah,
not
just kind
really. Yeah,
of.
yeah. So um, yeah, like and I've definitely found that too. Like reaching out and connecting with other authors is such a good experience, even just as far as um, just being able to talk about what you're going through while you're writing, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a lot of it too.
So talk to me a little bit about the world you created in Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard. How did you go about creating it, and what was the most difficult part?
Hmm. Yeah, so the interesting thing is that the political system was actually in place before the magic system. The initial idea I had for LG was that I would have a land where each of the countries, whatever you call them, I chose to call them courts. So each of the courts had a different virtue that they focused on and that they lived to a T, but so much that it was a flaw. And
Okay.
so one is focused on charity and love towards others, where, they neglect kind of the law in really dire circumstances. We have another one that's the polar opposite. They're focused on exact obedience so much that they forget some of their humanity. We have another that's focused on humility so much that it turns their place into a land of poverty because they give away pretty much everything they have. And I like that idea of different virtues and flaws because I was trying to think of good flaws for my characters, and it was a really easy way to do it. I'm like, okay, this just we ingrain it into their culture, and that eventually just went to I had different tenets to their lands, what makes them tick, and I think that's one of the most fun things I had, and I know it is a big complaint of people that have read the book is that it is complex.
Okay.
The government in each um, court has a ruler, and then it has 8 individuals around him that each focus on something different. Like one focus on agriculture, another on law, another on their religion, and so that it was a big thing that I think that people, once it clicks for them, it's really interesting. And I had so much fun playing with that. Like I said earlier, battles aren't my favorite thing. Of course, you're not going to be without them reading it. But I think that, the political battles, the cerebral mind battles are so interesting. And that's a lot of what goes on there. And so I went with that idea, and I have these 6 lands that all focus on these different virtues, and that kind of causes their clash as they approach the moral dilemma in the center of the story differently.
Complexity I know can sometimes be um, an initial challenge for people as they're reading, but it's also one of those things where it adds a layer of realism to the story and to the world you've made. And
Hmm.
especially if you're writing a longer series, it allows you to explore that world, quite a bit more than if you just had this surface level um,
Hmm.
construction, right? So that's really cool. So how do you keep track of everything that you're creating? If you've got that many layers of complexity, do you have like a world Bible that you have? Do you have how do you keep everything straight?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. So I just had I write on Google Docs. I have a separate one it's just called, Paladin's Wiki, because Paladin is the Harvest is the series name. And it initially started as just a place where I jot down information when I was writing the first book. Now it's turned to I have a glossary, I have chapter outlines so that if I, am not writing a certain part for a couple days, I can go back and see exactly what I wrote. Um, and a lot of that is just, make and Control F helps so much. So if I have something little that I mentioned, like let's say I have a character and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with him in the future, but I'll say, he has some hard relationship with this child in the past. I'll just go down to wherever I have him listed on there and make that little note. And then I'll try to review those kind of as I'm getting ready for my next draft to see if there's anything I've missed. And then I'll have, my outline. And then, like, my outline right now looks like I have maybe, like I said, 2 to 7, probably like 5 right now. The next chapter is there. And there's a little block at the bottom that says things that need to happen. So just getting those out, and then notes for the next book. So it's just basically I keep 2 documents, one that's a glossary and character guide, another that is just a place for outlines and all that.
Nice. And so your chapter outlines that you have, do you create that kind of as you go? Like I know you said sometimes you'll jump between chapters. Do you are you consistently going through and making sure that that chapter outline is kept up to date, or what's your process for that?
I try to, but a lot of time it will be like I'll write 2 chapters and then I'll have some spare time and I'm like, oh, I've got to go and write those chapters. And if it happens where I forget to do it, sometimes I'll just go reread the chapter real quick and jot it down. And even if I'm really trying to, like if I can't figure out what I want to do with the character and the outline isn't very concise and informative, I'll just go reread that chapter. But I try to keep them as up to date as possible, because even as like a reader, that's one of the things that I love. I'm reading Malazan right now, and having the wiki chapter summaries is a lifesaver. And so it's just super nice to go back to that.
That's cool though. I think you're the first author I've talked to, and not that other authors aren't doing it and just not telling me, but I think you're the first author that I've talked to that's mentioned creating an outline as you're writing, and as you're you create the chapter and going back and making the outline so you have it handy. I think that's a great idea if you have the discipline to go back and do that. I think for me, once a chapter's out, I don't want to look at it again until I'm editing almost. But
Yeah.
but I know, especially if you're writing, kind of an epic fantasy, to have that to be able to go back to and revisit, so you don't have to go searching for something, I think it would be
Yeah.
really handy to have. Yeah, very cool. Cool. So you mentioned the story is multi POV. Can you tell me a little bit more about the characters that we're following in the story?
Yeah. Here, I'll grab my copy right here. I still have the ugly do not, or not for resale. I should be getting my like actual books this week. But
Nice.
yeah, we have these 3 here. This is Fenmir. He is from Court Chus. It's where they focus on love towards others, and he is a surgeon. And the book opens up with Fenmir. He is a surgeon having to do a harvest on an infant. He and his people are opposed to this process, but he's doing it just to keep peace between lands. And he's the one that kind of rises to go against it. And so especially this book kind of feels like he is the main character, but all of them have equal balance, which is interesting because I feel like in the next one, he's not as focused on as the others. And I love that you can focus on characters, but it is really a tale about the people. Then Aerie, right here, she is a noble woman from Court Zays, and where they focus on exact obedience and perfection to the law. She is as for harvesting as you can be, and has a whole past that is later revealed to show why she is that way. She's very stern, strict, and not very tolerant of others, which I honestly had so much fun writing her, because she's a character that I want people to hate when they first meet her, but I know they'll love her in the end. And it's fun been reading some of those reviews where people are like, okay, I started off the book, she was my least favorite, then became one of my favorites. And she's the one that I feel like her character arc was the best written. And so I'm really excited just to kind of work on things like that in the future. And then Yetrick right here is the middle. He is with his people for the process, but he is more of just kind of a passive person trying to do what is right, even though he doesn't know what it is. And just he kind of tags along with the nobility and tries to figure out things on his own.
Cool. So with the character arc for that one character, we said that you kind of start out not liking her, and then by the end you really like her. Was that at what stage in writing did you kind of realize that was what was going to happen? Was that her character arc from the beginning, or did you kind of discover that as you were writing?
I think I discovered that as I was writing. A big part of her piece is that she is the one that does get flashback scenes, which I know can be a little cliche, and but it really defines her as a character, which has been some people's favorite part of it. And the reason I wrote that in there, like anyone that reads the book is welcome to talk to me about it, but there's a very core piece that if I told you what it is, it'd spoil her character. But it
Yeah.
was a
Yeah, don't do
struggle
that.
that, yeah, it was a struggle that my wife and I were going through in life at the time,
Okay.
um, just with the circumstances that we're living in. And so I kind of just got to throw all my emotions in there. And I think that's what made her draw closer to me, and which later turned to me thinking, okay, so she has this kind of redemption arc, and it makes me need she needs to be so much worse in the beginning so that you can see that. And it was super fun to write those character arcs because I feel like I had a clear idea with her, especially towards the end, whereas Fenmir, the first character, he's one that is just he was kind of a generic hero in my first draft, whereas we got to the end and that's when I had to put in all of his flaws, and but it made his ending so much more rewarding. So he's one that I hadn't, and that's the thing, I guess I had a lot of character exploration because I had his line that I had to later add interest, whereas hers I developed the interest as I went.
Yeah, right. Cool. Yeah, that sounds super interesting, and it's I'm glad you were able to put that sort of personal level emotion into the character. Sounds like it worked out well for you.
Mhm.
Cool. So, what can readers expect as they read your book? What kind of emotional impact are you hoping to have on them?
I a lot of it is, I have heard a couple people say that it made him cry, and which I think is an author's victory because you know that
Mhm.
what you're doing actually hits their emotions. But that's not a lot of it. It is, of course there is joy, but there's a lot of sorrow in it. The name Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard came from the idea is that this land was, a vineyard, a place of beauty, and why vines, I guess you'll have to read that to figure out. But it's a sorrowful look at these people that were once united and then split. Um, the one emotion that, or I guess reaction that I want people to have is just contemplation. I meant this very much to be a thinking book, which is why I have two people. Um, I have people on each side of the argument. This isn't clear who is right, who is wrong. And even in the end, if you decide this one party is right, there are people in them that are wrong. And a way to pitch this book is the trolley dilemma, if you're familiar with that. You have
Yeah.
the train, one track is a family member and the other one is three random strangers. It's an uncomfortable question to ask, but it sparks a lot of thought. And so that's what I was going for. I want a lot of thought, and I think that if people take their time with this book, there's a lot to dissect and a lot to pull from it.
Yeah, cool. It sounds really interesting. I am super excited to get to it. Um, Now, just a bit of a side. You do say in your bio, and you mentioned earlier that you are a marathon runner. If you don't mind
Mhm.
me asking, can you tell us a little bit more about that? I know it's probably a bit more of your personal life, but does it have any impact or influence on how you write?
I think it does a lot. One very, I guess, blunt benefit is that I run long distances, so I get at least an hour of an audiobook in a day. I try to,
Hmm.
honestly, in print, I read usually one, maybe two books, whereas audiobook I get through 4 to 5 a month. So that really helps me, I guess, do my studying. But marathoning, it's not an easy thing on its own. It's a very long thing of endurance. And especially marathon distances, you get to a point where the end where it really sucks. And I think that it's very well translates into writing a novel. You have a lot of the training that makes out the first draft. And when it really sucks, when you are near the end and you're doing your final edits, it is some of the most painful things that you can go through. But right when you push in the end, you'll have that gratification, that sense of accomplishment. And so I mean that, and just my whole running experience, knowing that it is hurting most of the time, but you're gaining something from it, and you just have to learn to pace yourself. So pacing and endurance translates
Yeah.
very well into writing.
Awesome. Yeah. And I asked that question mainly because I have this kind of in my, if I don't have it in my bio, I've said it in interviews before that I've done. I ran a half marathon a few years ago, and it was really that kicked my butt into actually writing that novel, because it's just you don't start out running a half or a full marathon. You have to build yourself up to it. I'm like, if I can do this for running, which wasn't something that I ever was interested up until that point. I
Hmm.
just did it because some friends of mine talked me into it. I'm like, I can do this to do something I've always wanted to do, which was write the book. And so I definitely found that it's you're pushing through hard, like you said, hard periods to get you to that end goal. And it's not always fun, but you just put in the work, and you'll eventually get there.
Hmm. For sure.
Um, so you run. So you said you run an hour a day. Is that?
Yeah, typically I run, I would say on average, 50. So I run 7 miles Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Wednesdays, I usually do about 9, which that one's more like 66 minutes. And then I do a short, usually like half-hour run on Friday. And then Saturdays are my long training ones where I'll run, most times half marathon to 15 miles, which
Wow.
takes hour and a half to 2 hours, and just got to get through a good time. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's something
Yeah, that's
else.
great. How do you do quite a few races in a year?
Not a ton. Like I honestly would do a half marathon every weekend, but they are
Okay.
expensive.
Yeah.
And so I did one marathon last year. I'm doing the Boston Marathon this year in April.
Very
And
cool.
especially that one, like traveling there, not cheap. The race itself's like
No.
$250.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a. I mean, racing. I think, or running, I should say, running is on its own a fairly cheap hobby. But once you start doing the races, it starts to add up pretty quick, especially if you're traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
I've
makes it
only.
just like, mhm.
Yeah. The one I did, he was local here, so I didn't have to travel for it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Awesome. Cool, Kaden. What can readers expect from you next? I know you said you're working on the second book, but you kind of hinted that you had, some side projects there too. Is there something else that you have going on?
I'm hoping to send my prequel novella to my editor tomorrow, maybe today. I'm doing one final pass before sending it to her. That should come out March or April. It'll be free to newsletter subscribers as well. It will be in print for, not a very expensive price. Then book two, I'm hoping to have up by the end of the year, and then I'll jump right into book three. And then I also am working on a side project that I'm at about 5,000 words right now. Honestly, the goal with that one is to do like Elegy is 120,000 side project. I'd like to get to like 90,000, and then just kind of have a series of shorter books.
Okay.
And more on that secret project will come when it gets closer.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's hard to talk on it when you're 5,000 words in, but
Yeah.
yeah, we have a few of those on the go too. So it's yeah, work in progress. Glad to
Hmm.
hear it. So, Kaden, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Can you tell me about how, in a parallel universe, a different choice might have shaped another version of your life?
I think that something that a different version of me would have done would to be start writing earlier. I know that it's interesting that a lot of people, I hear a lot of authors are like, I always grew up writing, and my only writing experience was just like essays during school and like maybe one or two creative essays. So
Hmm.
I think that if I would have started much earlier, I'm not saying I'd have a lot more books out, but I would have been a little more ahead of the game. Like I would have loved to, I mean, I'm still young, but to have published my first book at like 22 or something rather than right now at 25. And but it's something that I'm just glad I got to it, because I know a lot of people start later than I do, and it's we all have our different times when we're ready to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's, I often wonder too what would have happened if I actually started on that novel before, I was 38 when I published my first novel.
Hmm.
So, but I also think of the novel I would have written at 22, and it would have been a very different story than what I, and
Hmm.
who knows how your life changes over those years and what you need to learn in order to write the story that you've written. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Awesome, Kaden. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and how they can get a copy of your book?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, cadenrlove.com. That has the links to Amazon. You can look right on Amazon. Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard. I don't have copies, signed copies for sale yet, but they will be on my website probably in the next few weeks, as well as I'll be doing a TikTok shop. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Kaden Love Author.
Awesome. I will make sure to include all of those in the show notes. Thank you once again for joining me, Kaden. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad
Thank
we could
you.
do this.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.